Hi, and welcome to Faith, Hope, and Love During an Election. I'm so happy today to be talking with Michael Ware, who is the chief strategist for the AND campaign. He's an author, and he's a person who writes frequently for magazines and newspapers that I read, including he writes for the New Yorker occasionally, the Atlantic, Washington Post, and many other places. So in this very busy season leading up to the election, I'm really grateful that you made time to talk with us today. So welcome, Michael.
So great to be with you. Happy to be on.
I wanted to start to just to have you describe what is the AND campaign.
Yes, so the AND campaign is a Christian civic organization that wants to equip Christians to engage faithfully in civic life. And we advance a framework that's described in detail for the first time, sort of in an extended way in Compassion and Conviction, our book that came out last month. To sort of boil that down, we reject ideas of Christianity that would separate orthodoxy and orthopraxy, that would separate truth and love, that would separate compassion and conviction. When we look at the life of Jesus, when we look at the testimony of Scripture, we see that righteousness and justice, truth and love in Jesus are not dichotomous, but actually all hold together in him. And so we believe our personal lives should obviously reflect that. Christians' witness in public should reflect that as well. And so much of sort of the division in our politics today, and particularly among Christians, comes down to that sort of false dichotomy, that sort of false splitting apart of what are really, twin forces in the Christian life.
Mm-hmm. Right. One thing I was curious to ask you about, it's such a, over the last 4 years with, you're speaking of Christian witness and separating truth and love. And so many of the people that I know who maybe 5 or 10 years ago might have described themselves as a Christian or as an evangelical are feeling, uncomfortable with those labels. Their faith in God and their devotion and their own faith practices haven't changed, but just the loud example of people who say they're Christians, but then kind of look the other way when atrocities are being committed. And so are you comfortable with the way how do you call yourself, and sort of how do you navigate that? I know you've called yourself politically homeless.
Yeah.
Some people who are faithful Christians feel, not spiritually homeless, not separated from God, but maybe feel misunderstood or embarrassed to claim this, any sort of moniker around that.
Yeah, I totally understand that. I totally get what it's like to be out in the world and to have people sort of put on you all kinds of assumptions because of a sort of label like that. I do think that some labels carry less weight than others and might be more easily discarded than others. What I would caution people against, though, is letting sort of cultural moments dictate your self-conception and the way you identify in too powerful of a way. I think just personally, I think it's really the things that we name ourselves are just really important. And so if we're sort of changing those things as a reaction and not as a sort of proactive decision, I think that's harmful. And then just sort of sociologically and sort of how things work let's take the term like evangelical. Like one reason why people distance themselves from the term evangelical or say, I'm not identifying as an evangelical anymore, is because they say, well, in the news and in the culture, evangelicals are depicted as this, but I'm not that. So I'm gonna, well, what happens when you do that is that you cede the term to the very kinds of people that chased you out of it in the first place.
Hmm.
And so your people often do that, and I think they have this conception that they're sort of that it's a act of sort of agency, and that it's sort of a strike against people they consider to be bad actors or just people they don't want to be associated with. What I found is it actually empowers them. That by like evangelicalism is a powerful force in America. The word Christian is a powerful word in America. You leaving as an individual, and even, let's say hundreds of thousands of people leaving and not identifying as Christian or evangelical, is not necessarily going to weaken the cultural power of that term. And so I would just that's I think that's a caution and a secondary one. My primary one would just be evangelism is core to the gospel.
Hmm.
It's very hard to describe to people outside the church. Nevertheless, those inside, I'm going to, I still hold to the teachings of Jesus, but I'm not going to call myself a Christian anymore. That sends a message too, and I'm not sure that's a helpful one, even if it helps alleviate some of that tension that we have given this state of culture right now.
Yeah, I've heard some of my friends using terms like, and it's just the kind of thing that I've noticed. If you read a bio of your friend who's a writer or whatever,
Yeah.
Twitter handle or whatever, and I see people, instead of using Christian, maybe saying follower of Christ, or
Right.
I'm a believer. And
Yeah.
I really understand that as well. I mean, I often say, like, I'm an Episcopalian, because
Yeah. Right.
but yeah, it's hard. Years and years ago, I was part of a series that Sojourners had on their blog. They asked a number of different writers and thinkers and speakers or whatever to define what does evangelical mean.
Yeah.
And I came kind of late in that series, and I had read, a number of the people who had answered that question, and it was a really interesting question and an interesting series. But when it came to me, I felt like, oh my goodness, I don't have anything fresh to say. Like, everyone's sort of, picked this thing up and described it from an angle, and so I don't know why. I must have been in a very like sort of whimsical mood, but I ended up doing a survey of a lot of people that I knew pretty well, and people from all over the Christian map, and asked them what it meant to be an evangelical, and gave them a number of questions. And then I made a visual response to that thing with Post-it notes, and I made little charts and graphs. And it was so interesting to me because everybody had such different descriptions of what that meant, and also different kind of, well, many of them had a lot of baggage around the word. And it was just really interesting to do. But the person who I felt gave such a great response to what is an evangelical, or what it was my priest, an Episcopal of George Smith, who's still my parish priest, but
Yeah.
said, oh, I am an evangelical. Absolutely. It's about spreading the good news.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
His whole thing was very, very positive. Then there were a number of people who were like, ugh, it's, and this brings us to what we're talking about today, but people saw it as a word that was co-opted. And
Of course. Yeah.
and it's hard now, in these months, we're talking, in late August, but in these months before the election, seeing the headlines over and over of 70% of white evangelicals are in favor of this administration. And so I understand the desire.
Oh yeah. No, I get it. I just, again, like, so I think I'm a Willard guy. Dallas Willard has been influential in my life, and so phrases like an apprentice to Jesus or discipleship are really important to me. I'm also cognizant that anything can be problematized,
Mhm.
and some of the problematization it happens from folks who wouldn't be is driven by folks who um, really wouldn't be happy with any, with any, like some of the tensions are because of a poor Christian witness and all the things that maybe we'll get into. Some of it is just there are real fundamental disagreements, and these sort of disagreements over language can often be in earnest. Other times they're like postmodern sort of attempts to sort of change the terms of debate. And so, again, I really sympathize. I've been there. I tell a story. Oh, yeah. So I tell a story in my book, in my first book, Reclaiming Hope, about when I was when I took the job to run religious outreach for President Obama's second presidential campaign. And reporter asked my faith background, and I said, I said I'm an evangelical, and then I thought, well, I'll give them more of my background, so we'll just get this reporter will get a sense of uh, a diversity of experience that has informed my life. And I told them, I grew up in a Catholic family, and so I understand and appreciate Catholicism a great deal. Now identify as an evangelical. And the story went out. The reporter reported it fairly, but within a few hours, let's just say an anti Obama website posted up a photo of me that said, Obama hires Catholic apostate to reach out to religious voters. And I just thought that did not go the way I intended. And so all of these, ways of describing your faith can be distorted and depicted in unsavory ways.
The danger of these labels that we put on other people or put on ourselves. It's always better to have a conversation, right? And to hear somebody's whole journey and how they came to where they are, and not just, he's this and she's that and so on. But
yeah, that's good. That's good.
I love Reclaiming Hope, and in that book, and it's been a few years since I've read it. That was your first book of two. Just to plug your books again, I held this up before, but I have this one. In it, you really talked about and looked at what might be the future of faith in America. And I have a question, kind of a two-part question about that for you. One is, how has your notion of that or your ideas about that changed since writing that book? And the second one is, and this is opening a whole jar of worms, but with the fact that Christians in our country for the last several months have had to worship in such a different way, like we are now, like on a Zoom call. How might that change the church permanently? And I actually have some hope around that, to be honest. Like I felt a little brokenhearted at first. I had this experience on Palm Sunday, in my tradition as an Episcopalian, we always have a donkey. And we all walk around the church waving palm fronds, and so what they did on Palm Sunday this year was they visited the donkey, and and my priest, said, "I'm here with Molly the donkey," and they did a spot with that. And then there was a point in the service where at the beginning of the service, he said, "Now go outside and get some, some things to wave." And so my husband went outside, and he had just trimmed some pine bushes that weekend. And so we're sitting in our living room, and I felt stupid. And I love Palm Sunday at my church, and it just felt bad. And I thought, I'm done with this. But
Yes.
As time has gone on, I have a different appreciation for, I miss the sacraments, and I miss being together with people. But I've also learned some things, and I've also, I've visited churches all over the world. And one of my children is preparing to move to the UK, and I've been attending the churches where he will be. And that, I don't know, I wonder how, COVID will change the way we look at church. But also I wonder the first part of that question was just to say, in what ways do you see the future of faith in America differently maybe than when you wrote that book?
Yeah, it's a great question. First of all, UK is a great place. The church is thriving there, in my view. I've been really encouraged over the last decade. My wife works for a British organization, so we just have a real heart for the UK. So I'm sure your kid's going to do great. Um, uh, so I feel relatively good about so my Reclaiming Hope was published 3 days before the inauguration, and the manuscript was in before the election in 2016. And so I had some ideas about sort of the basic environment, but the manuscript was in before it took place. And so even with that, I feel relatively good about the afterword and the last chapter. The last chapter basically pulls out two issues, basically pluralism and religious freedom, as defining being a determinative issue for Christians to navigate in this country, and race, and I think that holds up pretty well. I think there have been just the developments over the last 4 years. I'll say two things. One, I think a crisis of confidence in American Christianity has deepened in profound ways, and there are all different kinds of things that we could talk about there. The increasing irrelevance of authority. I mean, I do think that what we even call ourselves is indicative of that, but I think there's a deepening crisis of confidence in the American church. And then, I think that there's a cultural antagonism, which is based on, again, going back to our earlier conversation, some very legitimate critiques, and then also some just fundamental disagreements that are not new, that have always been the case. So in some ways, the environments become even more difficult to navigate. What I will say is there's this idea in the book of, I talk about reclaiming, the definition of reclaiming having to do with sort of recovering a wasteland, sort of making new something that existed before but had been so misused that it was becoming difficult for anything good to grow there. And I have had this conviction over the last 5 years in particular that this is actually a time where the ground is being tilled for a new expression, where the ground is being tilled for really difficult periods of discernment and reflection and repentance, but also for the opportunity for a new faithfulness, for a new unity. And we're in that decision period now. We're in that period where the church has really important decisions to make as a whole, and then as sort of distinct streams of the church. And I certainly don't have all of the answers. These decisions are going to be made by the church as a whole. What I would encourage is the idea that we need to be increasingly reliant and cognizant of the reliability of Jesus, even in this moment. I think American Christians in particular, when under pressure, can default to trying to work their way out of a predicament and then thank Jesus after for how it turned out. This is a moment where we need to be inviting Jesus into the very working out not sort of blaming him or thanking him after, depending on how our efforts work out. This is a time for joyful confidence, to use a Willardian term, that is both secure in Christ, but also not passive. And I think that sort of spirit is going to be really important and really critical if we're going to navigate this difficult period well, that again is rife with both challenges and opportunities.
Yeah, and I love what you said about it being a time that the ground is being tilled, and that's been a theme that in a number of different ways, I think everyone with whom I've spoken for this series so far has said something like that. Like in the COVID time and since George Floyd's murder, all these things are being revealed. All these things are we were hitting reset on so many different parts of the way we understand our civic responsibilities and our faith. And I think too, I think it was Diana Butler Bass. I don't remember for sure, but she talked about this being perhaps maybe a time, this is a reawakening, and I know just personally, it's been a time, this last several months have been a time of reset, a time of learning new things for me, of educating myself. And in a way, because everything stopped so suddenly, and suddenly we have the opportunity to kind of go like, oh, what am I buying? I'm really paying attention to what I buy, because it's not a mindless thing where I run out and pick up something. Or, even like mundane things like, what are the cleaning supplies I'm using? Like maybe I can be more intentional about choosing things that, don't hurt the earth, and I'm just finding myself almost like cleaning out a closet, metaphorically, like looking at each part of my life, and even friendships, or again, like how do I want to be a teacher? I often do writing, teaching people about writing. What I've learned through this time is that a lot of people who don't normally have access to writing conferences do now, because they're online, and I'm a person who's disabled or otherwise unable to travel. Suddenly now I have someone helping me tell my story, and so I do think, as you say, like tilling the soil, all these, there will be things that are new and bright and hopeful that will grow out of this really difficult time. So, yeah. And then to the point of like, how do you think the way that we've been worshiping as congregations, or do you think that will affect permanent change in the church? And what sort of things do you not even predict, but imagine or think about?
Well, I think one, it's going to make us have a deeper appreciation for when we are able to gather together again in a consistent way. So that would be the first thing. I do think, and I am, I think there's been like an unfortunate sort of debate about sort of those saying that the church is only the church if it can worship together in person every Sunday in church, and those saying that is like completely that doesn't matter at all. Like I don't think that's either that it's either of those things. My 21-month-old just ran in here to say hi, so sorry about that. So I think that would be the first thing I'd say. I do think that this has helped the church stretch its muscles in an important way and figure out how in touch they are with their people. I mean, my general sense has been smaller churches have been able to be of greater assistance to members of their church, because they're able to have greater tabs on whether both the church leadership, but then also people in the church on like, Miss James, who we see at church, she might be especially she might not be able to get groceries.
Right.
Like, how can we help Miss James get groceries given whatever her situation might be? And so I do think the sort of consumer model of church, the sort of content machine model of church,
Mm.
is going to be proven to be insufficient in another way than it already was, in light of this moment. I think there's going to be a greater attention on churches where even if the pastor can't know everyone individually, where at least that there are systems of ensuring that no one is alone in the church, that there are networks of community that can hold up when something like this happens.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right. And again, we're revisioning all these things, and I'm hearing good ideas from different people that work in various churches about how to continue what's working, even when we are allowed to all gather. And so I have one sort of last, and again, a very open-ended question. Part of the reason I wanted to talk to you for this series is that I've seen you described this way, and I've seen it in your work, but there's a constant theme of you saying, I'm a hopeful person, or people describing you as a hopeful person. And, one of the parts of this series title is, faith, hope, and love during an election. So my last very open-ended question for you is, what brings you hope right now? As you are obviously a hopeful and a joyful person, but as you look at the upcoming election, in what ways do you experience hope, and about what issues?
Yeah. So, and you'll know this about me and how I think about hope. I think, unfortunately, in public discourse right now, hope is described as something that you must muster up, that you must, or as something that is sort of a disposition that one has without grounds for it. But like it's just a good thing to have a hopeful disposition. Or in the public policy, in the political space, prominent people have been critiqued for not having hope, and the critique has basically been, look, if you don't express hope, then people won't be motivated to do what you want them to do. Hope can't be instrumentalized, and it can't be just sort of concocted. Hope is based in actual knowledge. It's just so important. It's not an emotion. It's not a story we tell ourselves. Real hope. I mean, we could have false hopes in a whole number of things. I could hope that I'm going to be drafted by the Buffalo Bills next year. That's a false hope. There's no grounds for that. I've never played football, and but I could hope it. I could muster up, if I really worked myself up to thinking I could be drafted by the Buffalo Bills. And that's not what we're talking about. And it wouldn't be helpful. That would be a destructive hope, not just a false hope. A real hope is something that's based in real knowledge about the way the world works. And so, before talking about what kind of hope can you have for politics, we should be able to see, just by how things have played out over the last 4 years, not to mention the last 40, not to mention the last 400, that politics doesn't have some sort of inevitable direction in which it goes. That there is no sort of, King's quote about the arc of the moral universe has been misused, and I write about that in the book. And so you have to ask, what solid ground do I have for hope? My hope is that Jesus Christ came to earth, lived as a man, invited us, inaugurated his kingdom, died on a cross, rose from the dead 3 days later, and sits on the throne and is bringing justice as we speak, and will bring final justice at the time that is appropriate of his choosing. So when your hope is based on that I could be a co-laborer with Christ in that, but that that end is not determinant on me. I'm not uh, uh, without Jesus, I'm not bending any arc in any direction. With Jesus, I can step into the work that he's doing. When we talk about politics, what it means is that it's not a great idea to go to politics as a source for hope. The real vision I have, what our politics really needs, is for Christians who find their hope in the gospel of Jesus Christ and see in that hope implications for the rest of life. Like the real vision is Christians who find their hope in the work that Jesus is doing and then say, that hope opens up possibilities for good happening everywhere, including in politics. And so I don't hope in politics, but I can hope that, yes, with we need to put feet to our prayers. Yes, we need to act on our hope, but that good can happen in our politics. And it's good for good to happen in politics because something's going to happen there. Like this isn't a matter of, if I just pretend that politics isn't important, then it's going to be neutered of its effect. No, politics is going to be acting on somebody. The question is, who is it acting on? And usually the impacts of politics are felt disproportionately by the most vulnerable, who Howard Thurman called the disinherited. And then secondly, in what direction is it going to act on people? And we want politics to be acting on the side of flourishing, on the side of human dignity, on the side of justice. And so that's my hopeful vision. And once you have that vision, then you see signs of it everywhere. I see signs of it in the increase of civic participation among young people that are invigorated largely on a sense of justice. And we need to talk about our conceptions of justice and all that, but I think overall that's a good thing. I see it in the way that, I do a lot of work at Christian colleges, and the questions that young Christians are asking now are both heartbreaking, but also really wonderful and humble ground from which really beautiful visions of Christian witness can grow up, so long as those young people are supported and cultivated and discipled and encouraged and empowered in the right ways. And so that's my vision. If you ask me, look to politics, tell me what in politics makes you hopeful, I wouldn't have many answers. And honestly, if you look at the last 4 years again, or the last 40 years of our politics, and say, I'm finding a whole lot of cause that things are just going to work out, I really question that historical analysis.
Right.
But if you think that the kingdom of God is at hand, then a whole lot is possible.
Well, thank you. That was a great answer. Thank you so much for talking with me today. And we'll put your website and things like that up on this once we're done. But thank you so much, Michael.
It was so great to be with you.
Yeah, really a pleasure to talk with you today.
All right.